Welcome, everyone. We had hi, Mads. Thank you for keeping our timekeeping on spec. Technically, we're still on top of the hour, so we're okay. I know we usually start up a couple of minutes early. So welcome. Simon Walker here. We've also got Max with us again.
Hi.
Hey, Max.
Hi, everyone.
Hi there. So just the usual housekeeping. I'm sure that you've seen us many times before, but just in case it's the first time, just wanted to point out a couple of things. The screen I'm showing at the moment, I think I'm showing it. Yes, I am. Great. Is the major center of where you can book up for these webinars. And we're looking at July at the moment. So we're running through today, it's secondary color corrections. And if you missed any of the previous sessions, fear not, because we're recording this as well as all the other sessions in this series. And you can find those on the YouTube channel, Maxon Volume Program Training. And in fact, we'll send you the link. In fact, I'll put it in link in a second and into the chat. And you can find all the various recordings from not only the Demystified series that we've been running, but all the other technical sessions that we ran. So for example, this last week, Lionel ran some excellent sessions on 32 linear bit compositing in cinema and using Redshift and After Effects. So there's some nice techniques there. And also, I've uploaded the session that we ran last week, this first one of these color correction sessions, where Max and I delved into a lot of the color correction techniques. And here we've got a download link for the slides that Max shared last week. And he's mixed in some new slides. And so if you want to download both sets of weeks, that's inside that one particular file in there. So just really a pointer to go to the main site here, to the Max or the main YouTube channel, just to look at all the recordings. Fantastic. Great. And I suppose I better type that link into the chat, hadn't I? Great. Okay, here we go. I'll put that in the chat, and you get it as a follow-up email too. So I just type in the chat window. Here we go. Great. And the whole point about these demystifying sessions is that they're a little bit more informal than some of the other technical webinars. And this gives us an opportunity to answer questions and delve into some topics that perhaps that you've been wanting to ask. And it's a format where you can actually interact with us. So is an hour long enough to cover all color correction and all the things that we want to say here? Of course not, but the idea is to give you some pointers, give you things that we think you'll find useful, and also point out to other resources. And one quick other resource I wanted to point out is on the Red Giant site, redgiant.com. Just go and choose tutorials. There's hundreds of hours of tutorials in there. So even if you just simply wanted to find out about Magic Bullet Suite, you can click on the buy product or search in the search area and find out all sorts of interesting things about how to do various tricks. So this isn't the only resource that we do. This is really a focus on our training team, because our day job, if you like, as well as running these sessions, is to run custom sessions for production teams. Great, okay, thank you. And thanks, Kent, by the way, for the okay, that it sounds good and you can see the screen, as usual. Great, cool. So the good question from Lee, can we have a download link for the stock that we're using today? We're not allowed to share stock footage that we actually are using because of the licenses and so on. So we often use a lot of Shutterstock or Adobe stock or iStock. I've used a lot of times in the past. But we can share things that we've shot, so we can do that on occasion. In fact, we could delve into some of those shots that we have shot ourselves. So I know that's like a non-answer. That's another one of my non-answers to these things. But where we can, we will. But that's a good question, thank you. Great, and also we just wanted to just chat about something that came up last week, which was a comment about Premiere Pro actually not exporting always the same gamma curve, and sometimes you get shadow lifts on export. So we just wanted to mention that quickly whilst we do a recap of what we did last week and before we head into what we are going to cover this week. So you've done some digging into this, Max, haven't you?
Yeah.
That's a whole topic, it really is.
Well, apparently it's a big topic, and I'm quite surprised as well that the issue exists for quite some times.
The idea is, in fact, we got a couple of videos. Do you want to talk us through these, Max, that you meant?
Yeah, sure.
Which one do I start with? Render maximum off or on?
The off one.
Off one. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a video that Max was playing around.
Hi, sorry. Can you guys hear me now?
So yes, the great thing about figuring out new things in the software is playing a video then overtakes all the other audio. So oh well. Thank you, GoToWebinar.
No problem. I'll just talk it through a little bit. Apparently, there's a small checkbox in Premiere Pro. It's called the render at maximum depth. And apparently, those checkbox, if that particular checkbox, if you click that, and it will somehow do a gamma shift, so your crushed black will not be as contrasty as you want to. So the output will look different in your exported media compared to the one that you're seeing in the Premiere Pro. So apparently this has been the issue has been faced by so many people, and the solution for that is just by uncheck the use maximum render depth. So if you go to the video tab here, Simon, and if you there you go, render at maximum depth. So that's actually the culprit of the problem. So I would just advise not to use the checkbox if you want to have the real look, the like 100% same look like what you see in your Premiere Pro timeline.
Essentially, what's been happening is that the shadow's been lifted. There's been a gamma change on output, and this has been a known problem over the last few years in Premiere Pro. But this is a side comment, and I got somewhere to point to for you to investigate about this. But it opens up a whole other series of things if you are messing around in Premiere. And this render at maximum depth is related to the similar setting inside the sequence settings, where we're looking at the maximum bit depth. And these settings themselves are actually designed for systems that don't have graphics cards. And so there's to cut a long story short, I've got a couple of links for you to have a look at this. But this may be a good solution for you, or it may not be. Or it may not fix your solution, because there's a number of different things that control the gamma output in Premiere. And here's a small little, here we go, here we are. I can show this on the screen. Great. This is a great piece of info that I dug out of the Adobe support library, if you like, about the color shift. And I'll add this into the chat here, so you can have a look at it. Great. Great question from Andreas. Does this apply to Windows and Mac identically? It depends on your output or your workflow. I haven't seen it extensively reported on PC, much more on Mac, but that doesn't mean it's not. And I want to point you towards a couple of things. One is, here we go. There's a comment by Neil. Neil is a fantastic resource. He works for Adobe. And if I just jump to the answer here, Neil Haugen has a lot of work in the color depth for Premiere. And as he says here, he's spent hours working through this. But the issue is that this button is essentially allowing you to make processes or to allow for the fact that you haven't got a graphics card, or you haven't got a working GPU, as he says here. And I think here's the, here we go, there's a key phrase in here. It can, for some reason, cause some weird effects. So one solution we found is to switch it off, and then you don't necessarily have that gamma depth. But it's important to remember that the GPU and CPU processing is slightly different depending on what you're doing in Premiere. And now I also wanted to share with you a fantastic resource. This is possibly the best book I've seen on Premiere Pro ever. So don't worry, we'll get into the color correction stuff in a second. I just wanted to share a couple of things to answer a question that came up last week. And if you get a chance to go to premierepro.net and have a look at this book or this PDF, this is by Hsl Leopold. Hsl is an excellent trainer who delves into all the technical aspects of these color correction. And here's where I wanted to point to you. If you render at maximum depth, there's a whole series of information about what's happening when you click that button. So it's not the same as render at maximum quality, which is a different button that actually is a different algorithm to scale up and scale down different sizes of footage. But in this particular case, there's a great series of information. And he even's got an interview that he did with Steve Hogue, the senior engineering manager, who at the time when Hsl wrote this. And I've been on a sporting event with Steve Hogue. We were looking after the Premiere Pro workflows for one of the previous World Cups. And so I sat down with Steve and asked him these same questions. So really, this is just a pointer towards this particular area. And here we go. If I just type in here, premierepro.net, that gives you a bit more information about it. And we'll add these links. And Hsl's got a great article in here about dealing with color management in Premiere Pro, especially because in 2019 there was a new extra preference, if we just go into general, which then allows you to do some color management. So display color management requires GPU acceleration. So this is a whole subtopic that that is worth looking into and is worth much more of a conversation than we're just cramming into a few minutes here, but it's worth delving into because it might not be the settings in your export panel, it might be the color management cross-referenced with the format that you're using and exporting to, because not all platforms understand the metadata. Like Vimeo has a different way of interpreting metadata and upload than YouTube. Same with VLC as a player, so it's something to look into, but I will definitely paste that link into the chat window here. Here we go, and bang. Right, great. Quick question is that, oh yes, and Mads pointed out that A-Press have actually got the book going for £9.99, so it's slightly less than on Hsl's site. Full disclosure, I earn nothing from Hsl from recommending this, apart from a warm glow inside that you're actually getting access to one of the best resources I've seen ever on Premiere.
Awesome, awesome.
Great.
That's a fantastic resource there, Simon.
Yes, it's really good. It's well worth looking into. Quick question from David. What's the best graphics card option for a Mac Pro, given that Colorista and Magic Looks are going to be used for color correction and color grading? And is there a significant improvement with 2 card configurations? Do these tools make use of a second GPU? Is a one GPU a better option than the other? This is an excellent question as well, because you'll notice that even on 4K footage like this, if you get a yellow bar on your timeline, that's because the Mercury playback engine in Premiere and also in After Effects is actually processing your footage via the graphics card. And as far as I understand it, Premiere will process on multiple GPUs from CC 2019 onwards, but at export rather than on the timeline. At the timeline, it still operates with one GPU. In fact, I'll dig out a link as well to Dave's tech table. Dave Helmley of Adobe does a fantastic monthly review of technical things that are going to do with Premiere and timeline, and especially if you're using multiple GPUs, if you've got an eGPU setup as well. But the short answer to your question is that it's the fastest graphics card really that you can put into your Mac, or you can forward when you're configuring it, really. Same goes for Windows. This is identical Mercury playback on Windows 2. So the faster your graphics card, the faster Colorista and Magic Bullet Looks will process. And as Max is going to show shortly, we can actually stack up effects inside Premiere, and they still stack in order and to process using the Mercury playback engine. So yes, that's another long-winded answers, but that's the real one. And a question from Patrick, as far as I know, Premiere hardware encoding only uses NVIDIA cards. No, it uses both. It uses AMD cards. Dave manages to show it with both cards on one of the cylinder Mac Pros that he's been using, and both of those are active. Same with the AMD cards that I've been using on an eGPU. So that I've physically seen that active. Great, okay. So that's probably our longest intro ever, but it's kind of related to these color correction themes. And also these sessions that we're doing are designed to be interactive like this. And if we don't quite get through everything this week, we'll add it in next week. That's the beauty of having these every Monday. So
exactly. Feel free to ask any questions, everyone. Just interrupt us.
Please do, yes. We do have a more informal format on these Monday sessions, rather than the more formal technical ones that we run like last week's. So I'm going to chuck over my screen to you, Max, so because you've got some sliders and things to show. Here we go.
So am I sharing my screen?
Yep, I can see it. This is great.
Can you hear me fine?
Yep.
All right. Hey again, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, last week we've been talking about the primary color corrections, and today we'll be chatting a little bit about the secondary color corrections. And we come to learn yesterday, last week, about primary color corrections. That primary color corrections mostly target the whole footage, while secondary color corrections mostly dealing with the targeted regions of the image, right? And in the primary color corrections, we normally handle the issues, fix the issues such as the exposure, the color balance, and then adjusting the contrast and whatsoever. And then in secondary color corrections, we normally elevating our corrections by targeting specific region of the image, such as targeting the skin tone and fixing those skin tone area or the problematic area. And to do that, we normally use what we call the qualifications. And the qualifications, it actually just means selections, but that's the word that we normally use. People normally use the more correct term, so to say. And yeah, like I already said, secondary color corrections mostly fixing the particular area, and you can also use it to draw attentions to your subject. And then some techniques that we'll be showing today is also involving the digital relighting using vignettes, and we'll show that later. So in Colorista, to target specific pixels, to target specific regions of the image, we can use what we call the keyer, right? So let me just show you live. Right. So in this clip, thank you for, I would like to say thank you for Red Bull for providing us this clip, this particular one. So to search all the tools in Magic Bullet Suite, simply just type in Bullet, and you got the whole tools in Magic Bullet Suite shown in the FX control panels there. And then simply drag and drop Colorista to the effect controls panels or to your selected clips. So to launch the keyer, you can do that by pressing the edit button here in Colorista. Here's the Colorista. And the keyer can be launched by using the edit button here. So Colorista keyer is working in the Hsl space. And here, when you launch the keyer, by default, it will target the skin tone. And as you probably already guessed, most of the secondary correction works, most of the time it deals with the skin tone. So it's kind of like a shortcut that Colorista keyers is targeting skin tone by default. It's kind of like speed up the process. But to select another thing, so for example, if you want to select the sky, for instance, instead of the skin tone, you can simply use the select tools over here on the left. And then you can refine your selections, and you can see the selections in your matte view here. And you can refine your selections by using add to add your selections, or minus to reduce your selections, right? So let's go back and target the skin tone. And one good tip is like when you select the skin tone, it's best to select the mid-tone area, not the area that affected by the highlights, or the area that heavily affected by the shadow. So I think I will just go and grab this mid-tone area over here, right? And then you can press add. And as you can see, as I'm adding my selections, you can also see that my matte is also changing over here, right? So on the left hand side of the screen, we see the Hsl Cube here. And the Hsl Cube shows you the hue, saturations, and the lightness. So on the cube has 3 phases here. On the left phase, you can use it to change your hue. And on the top side, you can use that to change your saturations, the selections, the saturation that you want to select. And the far right is to use to select the lightness. And there are also 3 color strips that you can use that here. So this will be the hue, and this will be the saturations, and this will be the lightness, right? In case you forgot which phase do what, it's such a nice tips from Simon. You can actually just try it out and put your cursor in one of the phase. And as you can see in the scope below, this phase over here is actually targeting the hue of the selections. And then if you wiggle the controls on the top phase, you can really see that it's only affecting the saturations, while on the other phase, it's only affecting the lightness. So that's a good thing to remember in case you forgot, don't know what phase do what, just try it out. And
that's a good tip. That's a great way to qualify your selection without having to make a new selection with the plus or minus button as well.
Yes, definitely. And in the hue and lightness scope, and then in the hue and saturation scope over here, these scopes are actually interactive, meaning that if the face is confusing you, you can just like drag that selections and move it in the scope, right? And the same thing like the hue. So to change your feather, you can actually change that by moving the dotted lines over here, right? Something like that. Let me try that. Yes. And then one good tip when, like, for example, if I'm happy with this one, let me just refine that a little bit more. Like, for example, if I'm happy with this one, it is always good to soften your selections. And you can do that by using the softness slider here. And as you can see, when I drag the softness slider, my keys is softening up the edges, right? And then there is this tool over here. It's called the clipping. You have 2 points over here, the black points, and then the white points. So if you move the white points, all the value above the white points will be clipped. And if you move the black points to the middle, meanings that all the values below black point, this point, will be clipped. So once you satisfied with your selections, simply click OK. And now you have a selections ready in Colorista. So for example, in this particular key, I would like to add vibrancy to the skin tone. You can do so by just increasing the mid-tone towards the orange, right? Did you see that? And then also you can add the saturations on the skin tone area only by moving this particular orange color point puck over here, right? And then you can also change the hue and set the hue a little bit closer to the red or closer to the yellow, as we know that mostly skin tone lives in this orange area, the eye bar area, well, 20 degrees to the left and right. I think Simon has some nice topic to add about skin tone, right, Simon?
Well, there's a couple of things in that I mentioned here that are quite useful in terms of just working with the keyer and working with those HSL pucks. And I like your idea about doing that clipping, Max, because that's a great way of catching stray pixels. So let me just jump in and show my screen here. So as Max was pointing out, the key is a great way to be able to isolate a particular color. And if you didn't see it inside the panel, if we just scroll down to just below the HSL wheels, we have the keyer here. So just click edit and then you can open up the key. Sometimes it's easy to miss there, and often people ask me, well, where is it? So that is hiding there. So
Sometimes
in any case,
that happens to me.
absolutely. So the idea is that you can, as Max was saying, you can select a specific color. Let's say I wanted to highlight this sky and just use the plus and minus buttons to kind of just like manipulate the sky until you're getting a rough matte there. By the way, if you zoom in or out on like a 2-finger zoom on your trackpad or the central mouse, the wheel button, you can zoom in so you can make more accurate selections inside the keyer. But here's a nice little tip. Let's say, for example, I wanted to just like highlight that sky, and here we go. I'll just do the highlights and do something slightly exaggerated so you can see what's going on. Then we can see this is the area that you selected. But if you then jump back into the keyer, and the keyer gives you a preview of what you selected. So if we started selecting too much down here, or do a completely new selection, here we go, I've completely wrecked it. So let's start up at the sky again. You can see where we made that color correction because that correction is being actually honored within the mask here. So this is a great way of jumping back into the keyer and being able to see what you did previously. So as I increase the matte, and I can actually just click on the plus button on the matte itself, then as I'm doing that kind of edge treatment, then it allows you to see what you're doing. Also, if you ever do the softness, let's see if I really overcrank the softness, you can see how that color is starting not to fit to the edge here. So you don't have to jump to and from the actual interface inside Premiere or After Effects or Final Cut or all the other hosts that Colorista supports. But you can actually do this with inside the keyer. So that's a little tip too. But where I'm going with this isn't just to correct the sky, is actually to show you a nice little feature inside the keyer, which is as well as apply in the key mode, you can actually do a cutout. So let me make sure that I've got my transparency or transparency grid switched on in Premiere. This is great. So if I do a cutout like so, then I've actually cut out everything that I didn't select inside the keyer. So this is a nice way of actually being able to do alpha channels based on color selection whilst you're on the timeline inside Premiere. So this is a bit of a time saver. What I wanted to do in this case actually was the other way around. I wanted to actually make everything except the sky actually clear. And so I wanted to cut out the sky and make that the alpha channel. So let's jump back into the keyer and then do an invert matte. And now if I press OK, now that's got that cut out. And look, all that blue color correction that I did is being applied to everything else because I inverted the matte. So I'm just going to reset that. And here's a little tip for you. If you double click on an element inside Colorista, so double clicking on the color wheel actually then resets that value. So that's now back at 0. What you can then do is you could do a nice little trick where if you wanted to, you could then hide or show another clip underneath the bottom of this clip. And in this case, what I'm doing is I stole a nice frame for another video, and then I did a frame pause on that. And so what we're doing a sky replacement on that particular clip without having to spend too much time doing it. So that's a nice quick way of being able to work with those color selections, but actually working with alpha channels. Nice also, a little tip here. If I just hit edit again and overdo the shadows, or sorry, the softness, then if I go back, then you begin to see that I'm losing my alpha matte edge. So actually a smaller amount when you're doing a cutout like this is better because then that's looking less fake than that one. Fantastic. Oh, thanks for the comments. Thanks, Turkey. That's great to hear that this is being useful. Excellent. Question for Patrick. When you change curves in the curves editor, the blue one, is there a way to reset the blue curve? Not currently. So what Patrick is talking about is that if you just jump into blue and then you just change something inside blue, so just slightly drop it down and increase effectively increase the warm values in the midtones. Can I know what you're asking. You're asking, can we do just that one selection? Not currently. You have to reset it inside the curve here, but that's a good question and a good feature request actually. There's a little more flexibility if you're in looks because you can separate the curve tools out, but that's a great one, Patrick. Thank you. One other quick thing I wanted to share whilst we're talking about using these colors was, what if you wanted to do something like this? On a shot like this, this is the Shibuya Crossroads. I could actually share this clip because I was there. But in any case, when you are wanting to highlight a particular color, let's just show a couple of routines for that, including the Kia. One thing you can use the color pucks for that Max was talking about was saturating a specific color. So a nice thing to do here would be to actually saturate that taxi. And so just exaggerating a bit of the red and a bit of the orange, and that's, oh, I've gone crazy with that. Hang on, I just double click on a pin to reset it. Let's just exaggerate that orange slightly and do a before and after using the global effects mode. Here we are. So you can do small little colors like that. But what if it's a gradient, which the sky is? Well, you can just pick the nearest puck that you wanted to identify, in this case the blue one and also the sky blue one, and pulling those both outside the wheel, exaggerate the saturation. If I put them inside here, then it desaturates just those blue colors. So the left wheel is hue and saturation, the right wheel is hue and Luma. But if I just exaggerate the colors just like so, then here's the before and after. Great, the sky is being adjusted, but you'll notice that also a couple of these signs are also being adjusted or exaggerated. So what if you wanted to highlight just the sky? Well, this is a job for the Kia. So let's just reset those, and I'm going to add a little bit of blue into the highlights just to exaggerate that sky because I want to show you how it looks in the Kia. If we jump back into the Kia and then select the sky, so I'm just on the default color selection, and as Max said, it's automatically targeting the warmer colors along that eye bar, but I'm going to select just the sky there, and we can begin to select this area. Notice here that something I mentioned before, that you can automatically see the color correction that you previously made, and as I add more of that selection in here, then we are adding that color. You can see what you're doing. But one other thing I wanted to point out was that, let's select something completely wrong. Here we go. Is that you don't have to select the hue, saturation, and lightness together. You can select actually what you're doing inside the Kia separately. So here we are. So if I click hue and I select just the blue, then that selects all the blues in the image. And in this particular case, then it means that you've actually selected too many blues, and perhaps it might be a longer selection task. So what if we hit the hue and the lightness, and we then hit those together? Then you begin to get the blues of the sky and also the blues inside the building too. So if I just click on here and just start to add them, this is a nice way of being able to identify not only the sky, but also some of the reflection that you've got going on in the building. If I change up the softness here slightly, you can see the matte is highlighting the sky and also some of the reflections on the other buildings where that sky is reflecting off the shiny surfaces. And if we just jump into here and then exaggerate that correction, here we go. If I really go crazy with it, then you can see that blue that's starting to appear in those reflections. So a couple of different ways that you might treat a secondary color correction on the shot. Great, I can see there's a couple of questions. I'm going to jump back and answer the questions in a second, but something else I just wanted to mention is that the order of processing is important. So at the moment, we've got let's call this sky. The keyer is actually targeting the sky as an instance of Colorista on the timeline. So what if we did, or we copied and pasted that, and we have 2 instances of Colorista here and reset one of them. And then we have something go crazy. Let's push the shadows much bluer, and then the midtones warmer. I know there are other grades, but anyway. So the idea is, I wanted to show you this processing. If you are doing a key, make sure that in Colorista you have that processing as the first clip on in the effects stack. I know it's natural to think, well, hang on, I just have that as a secondary correction. I'd do it afterwards, wouldn't I? But can you see here, as I'm processing that key after that color correction, I've then changed that selection, so I'd have to jump in again. But the way Colorista works, it works much better as the first instance in the effects stack. So you can consider that even if you set it up second, the process was that you then jumped in and you did the color correction secondly. It needs to process it first. So it's just something important to look out for. You can think of it as if you're doing secondary corrections underneath the main correction, if you like, for the shot. Cool. Another question from Tom, can you import mats and render files into Colorista? Oh, hang on, can you put mats and render files from 30-book workflow shown like for depth or comping 3D renders from Cinema 4D or Redshift? Not inside Colorista in this way, because that's another nice feature request to be able to then target different mats. But in the current version of Colorista, the way it's designed is to allow you to use the keyer to sample the color yourself, really. Okay, question from Muge. Forgive me if I've mispronounced your name. When changes via secondary corrections remains on a LUT, if you apply that LUT on a camera or monitor, would I be able to see all my secondary corrections and some of them will be discarded? Anything that you output from the main program monitor in Premiere will then go out through the Mercury output, because that's how it's designed. So whatever you see inside the monitor area here will be then output via the Mercury transmit protocol onto your external monitor. I wonder if they still have the settings in here. There it is, enable transmit. So you can test this by switching enable transmit off and on inside Premiere. But it should process your secondary color corrections and your LUT, anything that you've got in the timeline, outputting onto that monitor. Great. So, how far did we get, Max?
It's far enough. I would like to point one more thing though that I really personally like in the keyer, that actually you don't have to stick with one screens in the keyer. We see that there are 3 screens in the keyer, and sometimes I find myself, I sometimes got confused. Which screen can I use to select the color? Apparently in the keyer you can use all 3 keys, all 3 screens to make your selections, and that is really convenient.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that is a really important thing, to be able to just jump between them and make selections on those, especially if you're selecting off the mat. That's a good one.
Especially if you work with a limited amount of monitors, like me.
That's true. I'm just doing this on a MacBook Pro, just switching screens. But yes, that's a good point as well.
Indeed.
Should I mention, Max, something about using these Hsl tools creatively? Or I think
sure.
I think you've got an example of that, haven't you?
Yeah, I would like to show that later on in the webinar.
Okay, well, since we're on that topic, let's jump in and let's do that, because I know you mentioned the skin tone. I've got something to show on skin tone too,
sure.
So I want to make sure I mention that as well.
No problem. So guys, before we move on, let me show you some nice techniques that we can use, which is employing the keyer in Colorista, right? We got a nice clip over here. So I would like to superimpose 2 different grades in this clip. So I want to have like a cool and receded, muted look in the environment, but I still want to have a healthy skin tone looks. And I can also do that by using the keyer exactly like how Simon showed you. I will use the keyer and will set it to the cutout mode to create a matte for the skin tone, while I will apply another grade just to the environment, right? So for this one, I will apply Colorista. And first, like what we learned in primary color corrections, we will deal with a Luma first. And I would like to use the Prolos flat LUT here, because in Prolos flat cinematic LUT, the LUT is limiting the amount of saturations in the shadow area. So your shadow will remain pure black. And I will introduce some cool colors in a shadow area, a cyan colors over here. And then I will drag the mid-tone down closer to the blue and just retain the highlight close to the orange over there. So now as we can see that, I will add some more contrast while we're here. So now as we can see that the environment is getting those cold look, but sadly our skin tone is also affected. So we can actually fix the problem by using a second instance of Colorista and using the keyer in the cutout mode and to have more flexibility. But first, before we do that, I will just constrain the hue closer to the cyan so it's more unified kind of look. And yeah, I could add the second instance of Colorista in the same clip, but after trying it a couple of times, I find out that this way is a little bit more limiting to me. So what I'm gonna do is just, I will just copy the clip. I'm holding Alt and then dragging my clip to the V2. And here I have the second instance Colorista copied as well, right? So I will just reset that one. I will use the same LUT I used previously. So it's Prolos Cinematic LUT. And for this adjustment, I want to target the skin tone specifically. So I will just focus on how the skin look, and I will not care about how the environment look. So I will just add a little bit warmth in the mid-tone area. Maybe something like that. And I will just key it out using the keyer. And as you can already see by default, it's selecting the skin tone area. I can just like add it up. And as you can see, you can use all three screens to refine your adjustment. And I will just soften it a little bit, something like that. And I'll be done with it. So at first, you may think that it doesn't do much because it still looks like it is. But that's because by default, the mode is select to apply. I can just select it to cut out. And as you can see, now I got two completely different look superimposed on one clip. This could be a little bit more kind of extreme look, but to soften the look a little bit, I can just stack another Colorista, and I will play with the environment. As we know in the reality, sometimes the environment also reflects the color to your skin, right? So we have like a cyany look here. I will just play with the highlight wheel and drag it a little bit. As you can see, dragging it closer to the cyans, it's reduced those kind of too extreme look. And by doing this, by having two different clips and two different Colorista, I now have the most flexibility. So for example, I can add the sharpness, the sharp looking look in my environment by using the first instance of Colorista in the first clip, and I will just drag the pop slider up, while I will do the other way around in my key. So I will just soften my key even more, soften my complexions, something around there, and it's just affecting the key area. And as you can see, it's only affecting this part. And I have no problem in running a lot of stack Colorista, since we know that Colorista is running on Mercury playback engine. So this method has allowed me to achieve this look faster with a lot of stacked instance of Colorista. So that's one tips from me. Do you have anything to add?
That's quite nice. I like the way that you're actually cutting out the skin tone and then revealing it on the layer underneath. So you're doing a cutout even though that you've got the same layer.
Yes.
Which is duplicated. That's quite a nice technique of using that cutout, and a nice way of isolating that particular skin tone, or honoring it, I should say.
Honoring the skin tones. Yeah, and as you can see, the second instance of Colorista is just bringing back those first look that I applied to the environment just by adding the highlight, coloring the highlight close to the side. Right.
Mac makes a good point on the questions board about having isolated effects as well. And so often you are tasked to do these color corrections, but if you sit down with a producer or director, or even if you're doing some tests and then you're getting some feedback, this is a great way with stacked instances to actually isolate a specific thing and then turn that off, but you keep all the other color correction intact. So it's a great way of working. And I'd recommend right-clicking on the instances of Colorista and just naming them, rather than having a whole stack of them.
You can also rename them, like skin.
And you can save them as well, because they're Premiere Pro presets. So if you right-click on either of those, or both of them, you can save them as a Premiere Pro preset and then share that with colleagues as well.
Something like that.
Exactly. In fact, that's a nice technique you had on pop there, actually, yeah. Max. I've got something that I could actually add in, and there's a similar one. Would it be a good time to do that?
That would be perfect.
Great. Okay. A question from Tom. Do you use cutouts, layers for multiple characters on screen, or just one secondary? I'd say it depends on the shot and also the lighting setup. I've seen lots of people use instances of Colorista depending on different shots that they can then copy and paste on the timeline inside Premiere, doing a paste attributes. That's quite a good one, but it does depend on the lighting. And if you're referring to use one instance for each character, like in the shot Max is showing here, you've got a slightly different lighting setup on the skin tone. You can do both. You can have two instances, one for each one as well. That works too. So don't be shy about layering up your instances of Colorista. It's specifically designed to actually have multiple stacks in there.
I think I can throw a quote from what's his name, Robbie Carmen from Mixing Light. He said like a very interesting stuff. Well, like everything in post-productions, experimentation is the key. Right?
Yes, absolutely. There's another great quote from Kevin, who also is the he's the founder of the ICA. He works a lot with Mixing Light. So, but I'll put the link in. Kevin also always says that color correction is just like focusing the camera, and when you can go too far and then bring it back. So it's always a nice way of putting it.
Interesting.
Yes, I'll dig out their links as well. Turkey is asking, is there a way to reduce render times if doing the method, and I'm assuming you mean the method of stacking up Colorista. The way it's working is that an instance of Colorista is then being sent to the GPU, and that keeps processing on the GPU, and then it goes to the next effect, and if it's also processing on the GPU, which Colorista does because it's an accelerated effect, then that's the fastest way to work. You can slow down your render times if you start introducing effects that aren't accelerated. And in fact, if I just jump and grab the screen here, Max, then I can show you what I mean.
Sure.
So if you go into the effects area over here, and you click on the accelerated effects button, when you click on that, you see all the accelerated effects here. And if you're using something which isn't accelerated, then let's just scroll. Oh, I'm not going to find one which isn't because I clicked the button. But let's just go into some of the effects and just go into image control or channel. Here we go. Some of these channel controls aren't accelerated, which means they won't be as fast on the processor. And another thing to avoid is mixing up 32-bit color effects with 8-bit. So anything that's a 32-bit color effect, like so, any 32-bit processing will actually process in that wider color space. But when you start adding in 8-bit color effects onto that, anything which doesn't have that icon, then that is going to reduce things significantly, or rather reduce things. It's going to add to your render time. So try and stick with GPU accelerated and 32-bit effects where you can. Great. What's the question from William? What's the advantage of working with nodes versus stacking these like in Premiere? Well, the one thing is that Premiere doesn't do nodes, of course, and the quick answer is both are great. I like nodes and stacking, depending on the host I'm using. Of course, if you're using nodes and Resolve, you have wonderful capabilities and options. But stacking is how Premiere does it. It's how After Effects does it. So that's why Colorista was designed to stack in this way. You could use Magic Bullet Looks on a node inside Resolve, for example, and you can use that in combination with lots of other effects. But it's not an either or. It's very much a which one is working for the setup or the workflow that you are currently working on. I mean, the similar argument would be the difference between curves versus color wheels. And again, they do similar related things in a slightly different way, and also it's down to how you like to use them as well. Great. So what I would say here, let's just reset this. So you mentioned, Max, the pop tool. Just want to say the pop tool, here we go, here. Pop tool is designed really as a dehazing tool. So in this shot, if I then increase the pop value, then you can begin to see that I'm getting more detail out of the shot. Here's the before and after. And what's happening is that the pop tool isn't sharpening. It's technically a local contrast. So it's adjusting the Luma level or identifying the difference in Luma level between adjacent pixels and then exaggerating that depending on how much you've slid the parameter slider here. This isn't the same as doing a contrast change. If we did contrast for the whole image, then you can see it begins to add information and detail, but also you'll notice that you're changing the saturation, you're changing the color. Have a look at the vector scope here, and as I change the saturation or change the contrast, it's changing the perceived saturation of the whole image. So a couple of things that the pop slider is useful for is for bringing out detail, especially on hazy or soft focus footage, without changing the color. So you'll notice here that I'm clicking on extreme amounts of this, and I'm not actually changing the color values or exaggerating them inside the vector scope. There is, of course, a slight color change technically because you're exaggerating these Luma levels, but notice that on the vector scope, you're not making a significant color change in there. That's the whole point about the pop slider. So, but with that in mind, I just wanted to show you a nice cool technique that kind of refers back to a couple of things we were looking at about making secondary color corrections and doing skin color corrections too. So let's just jump in here and let's reset everything. I've got a couple of things that I wanted to point out here, but firstly, this is a zeroed out setting of Colorista. And here on this shot, Angela is in a church setting where she's being lit from above and there's no lighting or reflector used on this shot. So that what we're seeing here is an exaggeration of the shadows on her face. So if you wanted to target her face specifically, you could do that with the keyer. And by the way, if we just jump down to the tool here, if you are needing to adjust skin tone, remember that a quick way of doing that is this orange pin on the hue and saturation and Luma wheel. and we can just drag it outside, exaggerate saturation, or on the inside, and just reduce the saturation depending on the lighting. If it's coming in too warm, you can push it away from red, like if it is a really warm studio, and vice versa, and so on. So that's a great way of being able to target just those eyebar skin tones. I mean, have a look on the vector scope there as I'm moving this here. We're effectively targeting just the color values which are normally attributed to skin tone. As far as the computer is concerned, we all have a skin tone along this particular line at a variety of different Luma and saturation settings, but it's along that particular hue line. Now, what I wanted to point out here is that there are in this shot a number of areas which are similar to the skin tone. Like look on this background here, there's a similar skin tone. So here we are. If I just throw on show skin overlay, then this gives you a nice overlay of the sort of colors that sit in that area. And as we move through the shot here, some of those darker colors on her hair then mean that they move out of being on that skin tone value. But in general, this is a very warm shot, so a lot of those values appearing. So if I start tweaking the color correction, and start going crazy with this, it's going to change much more than just that area. So there's a nice little trick for the keyer here. If I open up the keyer, then I can start to select the skin tone. And as Max mentioned earlier, a quick little routine is to, as soon as you've made a color correction, is to then just mess around with the clipping. So what you can do is you can then just start to reduce the clipping values of stray pixels before you make a selection. And also, if you add in an amount of softness here before you do anything else, then that significantly saves your time. Because then what you can do is you can use the plus button and draw on the face here or on the matte, and then also the minus button if I wanted to not necessarily select some of the background. But let's try some more on skin tone here. And there is a method of making sure that we can not target the background by adding in a key, a mask. We're combining it with a key, which is a classic routine. So I'm going to do that as well in a second. So let's just make sure we've got enough of Angela here. And I'll talk about these areas in a second. But we've targeted her skin tone reasonably nicely. And if I just jump back here, one of the things that we could do if we start messing around with the color here, we can know that we're actually then targeting just that skin tone. But here's the thing I wanted to show you. If you combine the pop slider with that selection, if I just drag it into the positive where we're increasing the local contrast of adjacent pixel Luma values, then effectively you're increasing the texture. And this is a great way of bringing out a texture, especially if it's on somebody's jacket or a jumper and it's a really interesting texture and you want to exaggerate that in the shot, bring it out, then you can increase this into a positive value. This is exaggerating the texture on the skin tone here. So you can also drag the pop slider in a negative direction. Here we go. And then target that to be softer. So you can see the difference here between the exaggerated texture and the non-exaggerated texture. So this technique officially is called adjusting for bad lighting, because does she need what effectively is becoming skin smoothing? Well, I don't think so. But if it was important for that particular shot to actually hide the texture or adjust for the lighting, then this is a good technique to be able to do. And by the way, we are affecting the background too. And if you make sure you don't want to do that, then you can combine that with a mask inside both After Effects and inside a Premiere. Let's just click on this mask tool. And there's a couple of little techniques that I found out. One is that if you have the mask set up to smaller area than you want to track, because I want to track this over a number of frames, then you can always go into the expand or mask expansion setting after you've done your keyframes, because mask expansion has a different set of keyframes to the actual mask path itself, which is quite useful. And then you can feather that as well. But let's say that we just wanted to start on this one area like so. Then, by the way, there's a little trick for you. If you press Shift, then you can then actually scale the whole mask up, all the points at the same time. Notice that when I press Shift and hover over this top point here, you can shift the whole thing up rather than having to move each one of these individually. And the same with rotation as well, because you can then rotate that. I mean, this is a Premiere Pro thing, so this is just really a side comment about something I found useful. But in any case, if we then start tracking backwards, what it is, it's a good job of actually tracking the movement with the not only the rotation, but also the size and the scale. And so what we're doing is we are tracking just that area. Let's show you the keyframes here of that mask selection. And so what we can then do is then if we make a selection here, just like mess around with the color, there we go, to make this cooler or whatever, then you can see that it's not affecting the background. We're actually then having the mask limiting the key and working together. So that's a nice way of working those two things. We can then exaggerate that out slightly like so, and then also feather that onto the background edge. So it's a nice little routine to combine a number of those techniques. And once you've done this, and you could do a whole range of things. I mean, you could actually then copy and paste that mask to another effect. So if you wanted to do some sort of let's just do, for fun, let's just do a blur. Let's just do universe blur on here and copy that mask. So just copy the mask and then paste it onto blur and paste that mask, and then use a number of blur, where we are going, blur width, blur height, and then we invert the mask. Then you can, if we increase the feathering, well, that's way too much blurring. But the idea is to kind of give you a fake vignette based on that same, here we go, let's increase that a little bit, based on that same set of keyframes. Well, I've gone to way too much blur here, maybe a bit too much feathering as well. But the idea is just to show you, here we are, that you can start to create like a vignette type effect using something that you used on a previous setting as well, just by inverting it. And I know that you wanted to show vignettes, Max. So that was a kind of a segue into adding vignettes and doing a secondary with inside Colorista. So
that's nice.
I noticed we're slightly over with time, so we've got a couple of minutes that if you bear with us, we'll let Max just finish up by showing you that. I'll hand over the screen to you, Max. Here we go,
Thank you,
make
Simon.
the presenter.
So yeah, we're running out of time. So before we wrap up, let me show you another simple technique in Premiere Pro using Colorista. Still about skin tones, using what Simon's already mentioned before, we can actually use the informations to do a quite different adjustment. So for example, this one is a log video. I will just quickly use LUT to technically convert the color space. And I quite like the look already, and just add the contrast a little bit, bump the midtones. So
where did you add the LUT? Could you just show that again, Max?
yes, the LUT is available here, right on the bottom of the Colorista panel. So it is actually at the bottom for good reasons, so that the adjustment that you're making prior to the LUT, the adjustment that you're making are actually happening prior to the LUT. And this means that your adjustment is made to a bigger color gamut before it is then limited by the LUT itself. So the trick that I want to show you here is actually I want to boost the color saturations by using the saturations slider here in Colorista. But the thing is, if I'm using this, notice that my skin tone is also got boosted. The question is just like, how if I don't want to boost my skin tone? How can I achieve that? Well, simply, you can use the second instance of Colorista and use the keyer. And this time, as we already know, that skin tones mostly live in this eye bar over here, we can just simply make selections, qualifications that excludes the eye bar, right? So I'm just feathering close to the eye bar over there. I'm including the red as well, and just like that. And I don't want the lightness, just the hue and saturations. So by doing this, now the saturation slider here will saturate everything except the skin tones. Well, it probably saturates a little bit because we have the feathers running onto the eye bar as well. So
I think this is answering Greg's question about he wanted to know if he wanted to target a specific part of the vector scope area, how would he do that directly on the vector scope in the Kia?
Exactly, you can do that here in the vector scope. It's an interactive scope. That's really nice. You can adjust the saturations over there. So as you already know that the vector scope is actually mimicking the hue wheel. So the color are mapped like the colors in the hue wheel over there, right? And the last one that I want to show is actually secondary color corrections, but without using the keyer. So here we just play with the basic of contrast, like we already know in the previous talk that contrast is actually the main thing that draw our eyes to the image. So how can I enhance my image? How can I digitally relight my image? For example, we have one image over here, and there's nothing really wrong with this image. It's a really nice looking image, and we know that it's shot in the diffused light situations. It's under the shadow, and it's a quite bright sunny day, and it look even and nice. But the thing is, like with this type of shot, sometimes it's too even and the subject is not really popped out from the background. So what I can do is actually, I can play with the contrast a little bit, increase the midtones, and probably add some cool shade in the highlight. And now I can also stack another instance of Colorista right on top of that, and just using a mask. Sorry. What I actually want to do is, like in the first Colorista instance, I will just dim my background a little bit, right? Because I want to make the subject pop a little bit more by using a second instance of Colorista and just mask it out, right? So I will just dim my environment here and reduce the contrast a little bit because I want the contrast more on the subject, right? So that's the first Colorista instance going there, and the second Colorista instance. Right on top of it, I will just draw a mask on the subject. And feather it a little bit. And here I will just add a contrast just inside my subject. And notice by doing that, by having the mask over here, you can see that the subject popping out more from the background because it's more contrasty compared to the background. And we can even go further. We can even go further by stacking another instance of Colorista and just mask her face to make her face more contrasty compared to the other part of the subject there. So, right? So by doing so, we are actually, theoretically, we are relighting the shot in the post-productions using Colorista, just using the simple concept of contrast, since we know that our eyes are drawn to the contrast, and we can just allocate the amount of contrast to the most important part in the subject, in the shot. And in this case, it's the subject. And in the more focused area is the face of the subject. And we can even go more into the detail by masking her eyes and just add the contrast to her eyes.
It's a really nice technique. Keeps it natural as well by not adding too much contrast. And also pops the 3D nature of popping that the image through to the front of the frame. This is, in fact, you're in good company, Max, because this is a technique that many painters have been using, especially since the Renaissance, to actually then bring in more contrast and detail into the subject. Rembrandt used to use this all the time. He didn't used to finish his brushwork. Yes, he didn't used to finish his brushwork on the background. So effectively, your eye was drawn to the more detailed area. So that's a nice way of actually exaggerating that. Very nice. Excellent. Right. Cool. So again, we were overrun. You know, it's us. Really try and keep this to an hour. So I'm really sorry. One day we will hit it. Absolutely. There's always the curse of always having too much content. Great. So let me just grab the screen back because I just wanted to show everyone just a reminder of a couple of things. If you joined us late, we was just pointing out on the RegArt blog where you can find out the link for next week's session, where we're looking excitingly at macro blocking. Yay! But actually, I think it's really good to be able to remove some of that macro blocking and be able to rescue shots with removing the noise, and also messing around with cinematic treatments. And what else are we covering in that section next week, Max?
We're actually going to use the remaining tools in the Magic Bullet suite, such as Mojo, Cosmo, and Renoiser, Denoiser. It's nice. And Magic Bullet Film.
Excellent.
And excellent. On the last talk, we will focus our attentions mostly to the Magic Bullet looks exclusively.
Fantastic. I think also there's an opportunity in the next two sessions to cover or then to rewind and then say, well, hang on, how do we then do a treatment like this to some of the previous techniques that we were looking at? And so we've got a couple of nice techniques for more skin targeting as well of lots of different types of skin tone. So we'll include that too. But as always, if you want to watch the recording, the link is on the blog page. Here we are. View all the recordings here. And that links to the volume program training section where you can look at all the recordings of all our webinars that we've done, in all the ones that we've done in this program this year, in fact, all 40 something hours of them. But in any case, right, couple like British Rail, extend arrival times. Yes, that's going back in time, British Rail. Fantastic, thanks for the kind words, thank you. Really appreciate it. And Dave's got a good point. Well, it changed the time to 17 minutes and accept it's interesting enough to be an hour plus. I know, we really try, that's a good point, David. We really try and hit the hour, mostly because we know that a lot of us are working remotely and you have meetings that are set to go on the top of the hour and then you might miss the end. But that's kind of the flavor of it. So we'll as we develop and do these Monday things, we'll try and keep to that. We've got many more nice subjects for you over the coming months as well, where we're covering compositing and more VFX stuff, as well as professional workflows for editing and Avid as well. Plus the return of Matt and Ellie for more Cinema 4D. So we'll let you know soon where those are going to be, where you can book those. But thank you again for joining us, everyone. And thank you, Max, for sharing all your techniques.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. And thanks, Simon.
Thank you. Michael, thank you. Have you got any follow-up questions, or if I didn't or Max didn't answer your questions well enough, please let us know, training@maxon.net. You can also find that here in the About section. Here we go. So this really describes what we're all about. And there we go, training@maxon.net, if you want to do a follow-up or suggest a topic for next time. Lovely. Okay, stay well, everyone, and see you on the next one of these. And thanks for the nice words. We really appreciate it.
Have a good day, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.